So last week we were looking at cells, and in particular we looked at animal and plant cells. And today what we're going to do is have a look at blood cells. So this is really exciting. I'm just going to wait for people to arrive. You're going to need all the things that we had last week. So colored paper, scissors, felt tip pens and glue, and we're going to be making our own blood cells today. So let me share my screen. Then we can get started. So let's have a look at what I have got here. So I've got lots of different colored pieces of paper over here. I've got my felt tip pens. Where's my felt tip pens? Let me put this over here. I've got loads of colors over here. I've got my scissors. I've got my tape, glue. I've got loads of stuff over here. So we're going to get started and I'm going to show you what we're going to be looking at today. So we have got lots of different things that we looked at last week. I'm going to do a quick recap first because this is going to be useful. So here, this is what we did last week. We created, hi Lucy, we created animal and plant cells over here. We have got the nucleus. This was our nucleus. This was our cytoplasm. We had our cell membrane all the way around, the black bit, that's the edge of the cell. Then on the plant cell, we had a couple of extra things. So one of them being the vacuole, or what we call the refrigerator. Okay, so the vacuole is a bit where we store things. Then we have these green things over here. What were these called? These were called chloroplasts, and these are needed for photosynthesis. And then finally, we had an extra security fence all the way around, and this was our cell wall. So these were the features of a typical animal and plant cells. Now, these are generic features. Now, what happens is in our bodies and in plants, we have very specialized cells. Okay, and these are cells that have a particular job. So blood cells are a cell that have a particular job. Their job is to carry oxygen around the body. So we're going to have a look at what a blood cell looks like today. And we're going to be learning a little bit more about blood, if you're giving blood and blood transfusion. So that's what we're going to look at today. So I'm going to grab myself a piece of, I've got paper, mine is slightly off white, so it's a blue color. And the first thing that we're going to be doing is to be creating our blood cell. So I'm going to grab myself some red paper, mine is card. I'm going to put this over here and we're going to draw on here our blood cell. Now, as we draw this, you'll realize what the similarities are and what the differences are between this and a typical animal cell. Remember, animal cells are the cells that we find in humans as well, humans and animals. So we typically expect a nucleus, a cytoplasm, and a cell membrane. Now we're going to see which of these exists in a blood cell. So let me grab, I've got my black marker over here, and I'm going to draw myself a circle. Now you can use something to go around if you like. You can draw yourself a circle like this, and then I'm going to do another circle inside. Now imagine if this was Play-Doh. If you had Play-Doh here and you'd made a little ball of red ball of Play-Doh and you basically squish the edges, okay, so the ends will bulge out. So this is the bit that bulges out and these are the bits where you've squished in. Okay, so this is what a red blood cell looks like. Now, at the moment, it doesn't look very impressive. So we're going to add some shading to make it look a little bit more three-dimensional. So I'm going to do some cross-hatching over here. And you can do this with pencil. You can do this with pen if you like. And I'm going to add some lines over here. We're going to make it look three-dimensional a bit. I also need to add a little bit of shading in here. So it looks like it's been squished inside a little bit. We're going to add some lines over here. You can see whether we can make this look three-dimensional a bit. A little bit of art in here. We'll do some cross-hatching, and we're going to do some cross-hatching this way. And I'm going to add a few lines over here. Let's just make it look three-dimensional a bit. So this is our blood cell. Now let's see what's missing on here. Do we have our cytoplasm? Yep, this is our cytoplasm. Now I've done it red because it's a red blood cell. But on our other image, we had a yellow cytoplasm, right? This yellow color doesn't really represent a real yellow color in our cells. It just is a way of coding out the different areas of our cell. But remember, we used green specifically for a chloroplast because a chloroplast contains green pigmentation. Red blood cells also contain a red pigment, okay? And that is from the hemoglobin. So what we have here is a red blood cell. So we've got our cytoplasm. The cell membrane is just basically the edge of the cell. We have that as well. What's missing? This circle here is not a nucleus. This is just showing you that the cell is squished. Okay, so this is just showing you that the cell is squished, and I've just drawn some shading over here to show the shape of the cell, shape of the cell. So here, there is no nucleus anymore. This particular red blood cell has no nuclei. There's none. So it doesn't need the boss. What does the boss do in an office? A boss tells its workers what to do. Now, when it comes to a red blood cell, there is only one function, and that is to carry the oxygen around the body. That's it. That's the only function that a red blood cell has. So it doesn't need, the boss doesn't need to tell anyone what to do because all the workers already know, all the cytoplasm knows exactly what it needs to do already. So it doesn't need a nuclei. Now, there are other animals that do have a nuclei in the cells, in the red blood cells. And it's really fascinating to look at red blood cells down a microscope and to actually see human blood and then animal blood and figure out which ones have got nuclei and which ones don't. Because you literally see a little dot in the center when there is a nuclei. Right, so I'm going to cut this red blood cell out. And we use some scissors. I'm quite impressed with how it looks. The shading has worked out quite well. And again, do share your pictures if you have completed them. I'd love to see what you guys have done. So I'm going to cut this out. And there we go. We have got ourselves a fantastic red blood cell. Right, so let's write some information about this then. So I'm going to grab a felt tip pen and we're going to write over here red blood cells. Now, there's a big misconception where people generally think that our blood is completely red because when we bleed, we see red, right? We see red. So we think that our blood is completely red. Now, what we can do, there's an experiment that we can do. And this experiment is also done in science labs when people have given blood. So you might have adults, or you might know people that have gone to the hospital and have donated their blood. Now, when they donate their blood, it doesn't just help one person. It can help a multiple number of people. It can help up to 3 or 4 different people. And I'll show you why and how. So what happens when you give blood is that your blood gets put into a little bag and it gets sent to the laboratory. Okay. And then they have a big machine. Now I'm going to try and draw this machine and probably we're not going to do a great job at it, but it's just to describe what's going on. So you can imagine that this machine is a bit like a washing machine. And it's called a centrifuge. And a washing machine is also a centrifuge. A centrifuge basically means it spins really fast. Okay, so this is a centrifuge and it has a container to go on top. So it's got like a lid. So I'm just going to draw the lid slightly further apart because I'm going to show you what's inside that centrifuge. So inside here, you have lots and lots of test tubes. And these test tubes are connected to this central post over here. And these test tubes look like this. They're slightly angled and they will look like this. So when someone you know, or even yourself, when you grow up, you donate blood, your blood will be sent to the lab and it will be put into a large machine. And the machines are different sizes. So I've drawn a really small one here. Some of them are as big as humans, and you won't put test tubes, but you'll put bags of blood in. Okay, so I'm showing you the one where you use test tubes. So these test tubes are over here. And obviously, when you donate blood, you're going to donate more than a test tube. So it's likely to be the ones in bags. So here we have a machine, and I've said to you, it works like a washing machine. What does a washing machine do? A washing machine spins really, really, really fast. And a centrifuge does the exact same thing. So a centrifuge spins really fast. Now imagine there's blood in each of these test tubes. And you might be thinking, if it spins really fast, it's going to flow out. It won't though. The gravity kind of keeps it down, and the way that it's spinning means that the blood actually stays in the test tube, but it starts to separate into lots of different bits, because this blood doesn't just contain red blood cells. We're going to find out what else it contains. Now, the way that we're going to do this is I'm going to grab myself some piece of paper. Let's pick, I'm going to grab another color. Let's have a look. I'm going to grab, oh, I've got loads of colors. I'm going to need these colors. So I think I'm going to see if I've got a white sheet of paper. Let's see. Can I find white? And I've got myself a white sheet of paper. So I'm going to draw on here a test tube. Now we're going to show you what happens when this test tube gets spun in a centrifuge. So this is my test tube, and then I'm going to cut this out. So I want you guys to draw a test tube, cut it out, and we're going to find out what goes inside this test tube. So if you know someone that gives blood, their blood will get divided into all its different components. And those different components will save different people. Okay, they'll be donated to different people potentially. So let's have a look at what happens here. So this test tube contains blood. Now, initially, it's going to look completely red, right? Because that's what blood looks like when it leaves our body. So it's going to look completely red. It gets placed into this centrifuge. So we'll put it into the centrifuge, and then it spins, and it spins really, 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 really fast. And then what starts to happen is that it starts to divide into different bits, depending on the density of the different compositions of blood. What's density, you're probably asking? Does anyone know what density is? Does anyone want to have a go? If you want to have a go, just type it into chat. What do you think density is? Now, we use the idea of density when we're talking about, for example, balloons. Okay, when you have helium inside a balloon, what happens compared to when you've got normal air? Well, if you normally blow up a balloon, it will just fall to the ground, right? But what happens when you put helium gas into a balloon? Helium gas causes the balloon to rise, and it goes higher and higher. And if you don't grab it, it will end up going up into the sky or up to the ceiling if you're inside. Okay, so the density of helium is different from the density of air. It's a bit like if you've got an object that's floating on water. That means the density of the water is more, and the density of the object is less, so it'll float. Brilliant. So you're right. If the helium balloon has got helium inside of it, it's going to float. It's going to go up. So in the same way, if you've got something which has got a high density, it's going to fall to the bottom of the test tube. If you've got something that's got low density, it's going to go further up the test tube. And this is how blood gets divided into its different components. And we're going to go through what the different components of blood are. And red blood cell is only one component. And that's the bit that's giving it the red color. But the other bits aren't red. So we're going to find out what else we have in there. So the first thing that we're going to do is to grab some red, and I'm going to draw around my test tube. because I'm going to get some red blood color in here. So the red blood cells only make up 45% of our blood. Okay. The rest of the blood is not red blood cells. How weird is that? So I'm going to do about 45%. So 45% is less than 50. 50 is around this much. So 45, I'm going to do around here. And red blood cells are quite high in density. So they're the ones that are going to go at the bottom of the test tube. So I'm going to cut this bit out, just a bit that I've actually put at 45. So here, I'm going to go around here and we're going to cut this out. And this is only 45% of blood, right? So you're probably thinking, if the red color is only 45%, what's the rest of the blood like? What does the rest of the blood contain? It's a weird concept, right? Because whenever we see blood, we see the color red. But the red part of our blood is only 45% of the blood. And what's weird is 55% of our blood is actually yellow. That's weird, right? So next what I'm going to do is put this onto my yellow bit, and we're going to draw on here. Now, when you add those two percentages together, you definitely do get 100%. But those percentages have been rounded up. So it's not exactly 45 and it's not exactly 55. There is a small area in the center which is less than 1%. Okay, so I'm going to draw, this is where the red blood cells would have been. Okay, and then 55% rounded up is around yellow. But there's a little bit in the middle which is neither yellow nor red. And we're going to talk about that in a second as well. So let's cut this out first of all. So I'm going to not cut that bit. I'm going to not cut that bit. It's just the top bit over here. The 55% is the yellow bit. And you're probably thinking, what is yellow? Oh, that looks horrible. I don't have anything yellow in my blood. You definitely do. And we're going to talk about what that is in a second. So let me cut that bit there. Right. So let's piece together the different bits of our blood. We have got a test tube. We've got red blood cells, which are 45% of our blood. Then what we have is we have 55% of our blood is this yellow bit. And that yellow bit is called plasma. So let me stick everything together first, and we're going to be labeling everything. How amazing is that? You would think that most of our blood was red. It's not. So let's find out what plasma is and why it's so important and why we need it. So we're going to put this over here. Let's place the red. So red blood cells. I'm going to do a little arrow to point to the red blood cell that we've just drawn. And then we're going to have a look at what else we have in our blood. So let's do the plasma. Plasma is the yellow bit. And we're going to stick this, over here. And then you've got that little white section in the center. Okay, so let's have a look at what we're going to have here. So this bit, let's do the red blood cells first. So here we have got red blood cells. Okay, and there are 45% of our blood is red blood cells. So I can write over here, this is 45%. And because it's RBC, red blood cells, sometimes this gets shortened to RBC. Okay, so red blood cells. There's 45% of our blood is red blood cells. What does that actually, let's write a little bit of information about red blood cells. Now, I mentioned before that you get the red pigmentation from hemoglobin because they contain iron. Iron gives a reddish color. So I can write over here, let's write the shape of this. What shape is this? Because remember I said it's like a circle, but it's been squished. So it's a bioconcave shape. So I can write here biconcave shape. That's number one. That's the first thing I can write there. Okay. And the reason why it's this shape is because it increases its surface area. Now, if you imagine a round ball, if you squish it, you're going to have more surface area. There's more of the surface, so there's more space for oxygen to get absorbed in. And that's what you want. The second thing is it contains hemoglobin. Now, this is a difficult word, so let's see if I can spell it. It's H-A-E-M-O-G. It's like goblin, globin. And then the final thing is we've already said and identified there's no nucleus. So human red blood cells have no nucleus. No nucleus. And the reason for that is because it wants to maximize the amount of oxygen it can carry. And plus the blood cell knows exactly what it needs to do, right? So that is your red blood cells. What about this bit? I mentioned that this is called plasma. What exactly is plasma? What does it do? Okay, why is there so much of it? So there's 55% of our blood is actually plasma. And plasma is a yellow liquid. It looks a bit like urine. It really does look like urine. And it can contain urea, which actually produces urine in your system eventually. Okay, so urea is all the waste products, and it takes it from the liver to the kidneys. So let's have a look at what this carries. So this is basically a liquid. It's a yellow, pale yellow liquid. It carries, so imagine this liquid is like water. It has red blood cells in there, and it has other things in there floating on there. Okay, so plasma is really important because it's carrying the red blood cells. It's carrying the things that we have here, which we're going to talk about in a second. Okay, it also carries waste products. So it carries carbon dioxide. So these red blood cells are carrying the oxygen around our body. And then when the blood travels to different parts of our body, the carbon dioxide that's produced by our cells gets carried back to our lungs in the plasma. Okay, and we've already said it carries urea. This also carries the digested food products. So things that you're eating, it carries it from the small intestine, because remember, your small intestine are taking the nutrients and then it goes around your body. And the final thing is it carries heat energy. So there's loads and loads of things that the plasma is carrying. And it's really important that we have plasma. So let's write over here, plasma. And I'm going to draw an arrow. Where we're going to point to plasma. And we're going to say that this is a pale yellow liquid. So we can say pale yellow liquid, and it carries things. Okay, so it carries, I'm going to label a few things that I've said. So it carries red blood cells, RBC is red blood cells. It carries carbon dioxide, which is CO2. This is carbon dioxide. What else does it carry? It carries urea from the liver to the kidneys, and eventually that becomes urine, which is why you got a yellow color there, right? It carries food, so nutrients from the small intestines to the rest of the body, and it carries heat. So some people suffer from not having enough plasma, so then they will be given some plasma through blood transfusion. Right, so your blood transfusion depends on what's missing. Now let's have a look at this bit over here, the little 1%. And this is really, really relevant right now, because when we get ill, our body is able to fight illnesses generally, right? We have an immune system, and this is really important. So here in this tiny little area, and you might be thinking that's such a small bit, so it's not going to make a difference if we don't have that. It makes huge amounts of differences. So here we have two things. This 1%, this is less than 1%. So this sign means less than 1%. We contain a couple of things. One of them is white blood cells, and we're going to be looking at this in more detail in a little while. Now, I don't have a white pen that I can use on here, so I'm going to do this in bubbly format. So we're going to have white, and we're going to talk about the white blood cells in a second. White blood. What do you think this gets shortened to? Have a look at what we shortened red blood cells to. What do you think white blood cells gets shortened to? Any ideas? White blood cells. What do you think? So red blood cells get shortened to RBC. White blood cells get shortened to WBC. Because, come on, scientists are a bit lazy, like mathematicians. They don't like writing the entire word, so they shorten things down. So we have white blood cells in this little white area, and we have one other thing. Well done, Kimmy. And we've got one other thing, and this is really fascinating. We have something called platelets. What's a platelet? Well, you can imagine a platelet to be like a little sleeping spider. It's not a real spider, but you can imagine it to be like a spider. So a platelet, I'm going to draw a platelet. Let's draw a platelet. A platelet are little fragments of cells. So they're like this. Okay. And these are, I'm going to write it here, platelets. Platelets. The little fragments of larger cells. So they look like little pieces. Now, why are these so important? Now, imagine that you've cut yourself. Okay, so you've cut yourself maybe with a pair of scissors, or maybe you've got a paper cut. And what happens when you have cut yourself? You start to bleed, right? You've got blood gushing out of your little wound. So what's going to happen? Let's draw my finger here. I have got a little paper cut and my skin's broken and the blood is gushing out. So I'm going to grab, have I got a red felt tip pen? Let's see if I can find red. And we've got this blood. Oh, what's happened to my red? I need to find a red that actually works. So you've got this blood, that's better. You've got all this blood gushing out and it's going to bleed and it'll continue to bleed. If we didn't have a platelet, if we didn't have platelets, that little cut that you've got on your finger could kill you. You could bleed and bleed and bleed and bleed and lose so much blood, it could kill you, right? So these platelets are so important because what do they do? So this is, remember, your finger. You've hurt yourself on your finger or any part of your skin or body. What's going to happen is that these platelets, they're sleeping, they're carrying on, they're asleep in your blood, and they don't really do much until you cut yourself. When there's a cut, signals are sent across to these little platelets and they kick into action like little superheroes. So these platelets will jump into action and like little spiders, they will stretch across like this, across the opening that you've got, and there'll be loads of them. They'll travel across and they'll fill that opening. What happens when you cut yourself? You have a clot being built up, right? You have a blood clot. And then if you pick at that blood clot, it starts to bleed again. And then you have a clot being built up again. These platelets are responsible for your blood to clot when there is a cut. Okay, they prevent blood loss. They prevent microorganisms from entering into your blood because that could also be dangerous as well. And you could get an infection. So this is a really amazing safety net that your body has to stop things from coming in and to stop your blood from escaping from your body. And some people suffer from an illness and they don't have enough platelets. And what happens is that if they cut themselves, no matter how small the cut is, and it could just basically be a paper cut, it could be life-threatening for them. Okay, and I had a student once, and she used to come to my science workshops, and we had to be really careful whenever we were using scissors or even paper, anything. We had to be really careful because if she cut herself, it would have to be a 999 emergency. So that's a condition that people can suffer with, and what can happen is if someone has a lack of platelets, a blood transfusion can give them platelets. If the blood matches, if the blood types match, you can give them platelets to help their blood to clot. But there's also medication that they can take to avoid them from bleeding so quickly when there's a cut. Okay, so it's really fascinating that we have all of these little bits in our body that work so well together. So this is what the platelets do. So the platelets will get activated when we've got a cut, and they will save us from bleeding so much. Okay, so let's make some notes over here. So we've said already that these are responsible for helping our blood to clot. So we're going to say here, they clot blood. Okay, and the reason why they clot the blood is they want to stop blood loss. So they stop blood loss, but at the same time, they are stopping microorganisms from entering the body. So we can say here, they prevent all the bacteria, everything, because remember, our hands are really dirty. We touch lots of surfaces and we pick up germs. So they prevent microorganisms, and microorganisms are little things. And we have loads of microorganisms that are already in our body, but harmful microorganisms from entering our body because they're no good from entering our body. So this is the responsibility of the platelets. And that's what, even though there's only like less than 1%, they're so vital. Right, let's have a look at white blood cells. What are white blood cells? And you must have heard of this because we've had COVID, and you must have heard of our own immune system. And we've got white blood cells that actually fight off infections and fight off viruses and fight off other things that are entering our system, which are not good for us. Okay, and there's different types of white blood cells. White blood cells are basically like soldiers and heroes that are stopping and they're fighting infections that are entering us. And we're going to talk about two different types. We're going to talk about phagocytes and lymphocytes. Okay, and we're going to be drawing some pictures to show you how they work. Now, you could get really, really creative. You could draw platelets with like superhero capes on them, ready to like go into action when there's a blood clot. You could draw the white blood cells as soldiers and superheroes and create a little comic book if you wanted to become really creative. Right, so let's have a look at what white blood cells do. And I'm going to go onto the back of the page now. Oh, I need to stick this down. Let's stick down our red blood cells. So far, we've talked about a couple of different things. We've talked about how blood is not just all red. It contains elements which are yellow. There's elements of our blood which are white, and there's elements of our blood which are red. And the red color comes from having iron. So hemoglobin, it contains hemoglobin, but hemoglobin contains iron. Okay, and iron gives that red pigmentation in our blood. We've talked about how if you were to take some blood samples and you put it into a centrifuge, and we said that a centrifuge is basically like a washing machine, but it has slots to put either bags of blood, or you can put test tubes in there, and we can spin that really quickly and it will separate the blood. Now, a typical person will have the ratios 45%, 55%, and then less than 1% is white blood cells and platelets. Okay, now that's a typical person. Now, some people will have more red blood cells. Some people will have less white blood cells. Some people will have more plasma. And all of those different variations can mean that there's something not quite right. Okay, and the imbalance can cause your body to be ill. So it's really important. So there's a lot of work done where scientists will put blood samples of different people to analyze their blood and quickly be able to tell what's wrong. Okay, so in here we have plasma. Plasma makes up 55%, and that's a pale liquid, and it carries red blood cells, carries carbon dioxide, urea, food, heat. So it's responsible for being a carrier of lots of different things. Then we have white blood cells and platelets. So we've said that white blood cells are part of our immune system. They fight foreign harmful microorganisms. Platelets are also responsible for fighting that if something, well, they prevent. Platelets prevent, white blood cells fight. So platelets will stop things from entering our body in the first place. If you've got a cut, they will clot the blood, and they'll stop you from bleeding to death as well. Okay, so they're very, very, very important. Now we're going to go to the back of this page, and we're going to have a look at the two different type of white blood cells that I'm going to focus on today. And there's many, many white blood cells, but we're going to focus on two. So I'm going to write over here, white blood cells. And then I'm going to get my felt tips out because I'm going to create some arrows. So we're going to do one arrow coming down here. And I'm going to do another arrow coming down here. And I'm going to put a square around this over here. So white blood cells, let's have a look at the two different types. The first one I'm going to have over here, and I write this as PHAGA, phagocytes. So these here, they ingest foreign microorganisms. Okay, so they fight. So all white blood cells will be fighting microorganisms that are entering the body. And those microorganisms are usually referred to as pathogens. Okay, so I'm going to use the word microorganisms because I think it's nice to use that word. So we're going to say that these ones over here, let's cut out what it looks like first of all. So I'm going to grab a piece of this colored paper, and I'm going to draw on what this looks like. So this is really fascinating. So it's going to look like we're drawing monsters, and we can put eyes on them if you like. So, oops, a lot of my felt tips. I've run out of color. Let's see if I can do this one. So with phagocytes, they basically open up and eat the foreign microorganisms. And I've run out of color with that. So I think I'm going to use this one over here. This works. So what happens is if they sense that something is near them that shouldn't be in the body, they basically gobble them up, right? And we have little structures inside of this. So I'm going to just draw the structures in here. And you have lots of different types as well, but I'm just going to draw one type over here. And I'm going to cut this out. And when I cut it out and stick it here, I'm going to draw little microorganisms or pathogens that it's swallowing, gobbling up. So let me grab my piece of paper and scissors, and I'm going to cut this bit out. And we're going to have a look at this. Now, normally when I do this in a group exercise, when people are with me or on the screen with me, we will create stories and we'll add eyes and all sorts of things. And it's normally based on what the kids want to create, what kind of heroes they want to make, because these cells are basically heroes of our body. They help protect us. They're our protectors. And it's really important to eat healthy, to get the right amounts of vitamins and minerals, because then that keeps our white blood cells and the rest of our body healthy. So they are ready fed and ready to go and attack if something is entering our body. Okay, so this is a phagocyte over here, and I'm going to draw lots of little bacteria and pathogens or microgens that this is going to be microorganisms that this is going to be gobbling up. It basically eats them. I could actually draw an eye over here and like big teeth if you wanted to. Look like a dinosaur then. So I'm going to stick this over here. So this is one type of white blood cell. We're going to look at another type now, and that works slightly differently. And I could spend hours and hours just talking about white blood cells because there's so many different ones with different roles in our body. But we're going to focus on two. So phagocytes, generally speaking, do this. And then the other one is lymphocytes. So Lymphocytes. These work slightly differently. These produce antibodies. So you might have heard this word. Sometimes we take vaccinations, which will give us antibodies. And sometimes we will get our body will naturally produce antibodies when there is a foreign microorganism or pathogen that has entered our body and our body tries to fight it. Okay, so this is how lymphocytes work, by producing antibodies. Every single pathogen, every single foreign microorganism that enters our body has a unique molecule. Okay, it has a unique thing attached to it. Okay, and what lymphocytes do is they produce antibodies for that kind of stick to these things. So let me draw first of all what we're going to have. We're going to have a lymphocyte that's just going to look like, it's going to look like a animal cell. So we have something like this, and inside here you've got its nucleus. And again, you get lots of different types, and you can do a quick search and find out lots of different types there. So I'm going to cut this out. And I'm going to right, so this is our lymphocyte. Now, these tiny little pathogens over here, these tiny little microorganisms, if you were to look really, really, really closely at them, they're not just a dot. What they look like is like a long caterpillar with lots of spiky bits. Even coronavirus is round with lots of spiky bits. And those spiky bits are important, okay? Because when our antibodies fight these foreign microorganisms, they will stick to those spikes, okay? And they will stop it from attacking our body. So let's have a look at what this looks like. So I'm going to first of all stick this down. Stick it down. So remember, we said that each microorganism has a unique molecule. That unique molecule that it has is called an antigen. Okay, so I'm going to draw this really big, and it has tried to attack this cell. So I'm going to color it in black like I had these ones, but I'm going to give it some spikes. So we're going to draw some spikes all the way around it. So let's draw some spikes on here. And I'm going to draw some red spikes like this. And our coronavirus one is just round with spikes on. Okay, so this has a specific unique code. When it attacks our cells, our white blood cells, these lymphocytes produce a little special thing. They produce little antibodies. So these come out of this cell. Okay, so these antibodies then live in our body, and they're always there. So it's like when you have chickenpox. You catch it the first time, your body produces these antibodies, and then it's ready. It's ready and armed for the next strike. When something attacks you without you realizing, like if something just pops around the door, you get scared, right? You're not prepared. But once that's happened once, you're going to be prepared. You're going to be ready for someone that jumps around from the other side of the door, right? If your siblings are kind of trying to scare you, you're going to be prepared. You're going to be prepared the second time. So what happens here is your body prepares itself. If it gets attacked once, it will be ready. It'll be ready with these shields for a future attack. So in the future, if this thing enters your body again, and remember I said each of these microorganisms has got a very unique molecule structure. So it will know. These white blood cells will go, hang on a second, I recognize that. I've seen that before. Just like if you try and get chickenpox a second time, your body will go, I recognize that illness before. And what will happen is that these antibodies come over here and they will stick to your pathogen and stop it from havocing your body. So this is what happens. And they'll stick all the way around. And this is why antibodies are so important, because they stop your body from falling ill again if you've had that illness before. So then you're probably wondering, why do I always get the cold? Why can I catch the flu again and again? That's because the structure of the molecule changes slightly. So these are clever little things. If your sister is trying to scare you from the door each time, they will realize that after the first or second time, you don't get scared anymore because you're expecting them to do that. So then your sibling has to come up with something different, right? They might then jump, like, I don't know, make a loud noise or look through the window and try scaring you rather than the door, right? They'll try something different. And these pathogens are exactly the same. They're a bit smart. They go, okay, I can't enter this body because they've already got something that is prepared to shield them from getting ill again. So they change slightly. And when that change happens, your body doesn't have the correct antibodies to fight it anymore. So you get ill again, but you won't get the same type of cold twice. You get different colds. This is why you can get a cold again and again and again and again, because it changes. Okay, the microorganisms that are entering your body change. So you get a different version of a cold with similar sort of symptoms, but it's different. Okay, and this is why when we're talking about the coronavirus and the different variations, and we're not sure if the vaccinations are going to work with the different variations, or some people say that they might not, or some people say that they will work. It's about whether the antibodies that your body is going to create will be sufficient for the different variations. And so it's really fascinating to understand this because it's so relevant right now. Right? So I'm just going to label this. So this was our pathogen or our microorganism. These were our antibodies. Antibodies. So these are two ways that our white blood cells protect us. Okay, and you can have a whole session on this, and there's so much more that you could be learning. So let's do a quick recap, guys. So we started off talking about red blood cells and how they are different from a normal animal cell because they don't contain a nucleus. We then talked about a centrifuge and how you can use that to separate your blood. And this blood can be used to save multiple different people if there's different things that they need. Some people might need red blood cells, some people might need plasma, some people might need white blood cells and platelets. So they can save up to 3 or 4 different people when you give blood. And this is why giving blood is so important. Platelets help clot blood, plasma helps you carry stuff, and white blood cells protect and shield your body. Right, so they're very important. And we talked about 2 different types, phagocytes and lymphocytes. and they're super, super important. This looks like a wood lice, doesn't it? They're super important. Lymphocytes produce antibodies. Pathogens just ingest. They just eat up any microorganism that they see. Okay, so thank you guys for listening. It's been great having you with me tonight, this evening. So we have so far looked at animal and plant cells, and today I've looked at red blood cells, and I think next week we might be able to do nerve cells. So actually, how does signals get carried down to our fingertips and all different parts of our body? And how, when we touch something, how do we know we're touching something? Like, what's happening? So we're going to be looking at nerve cells and how they work and how they send electrical signals all around our body. So that's going to be next week. So if you've enjoyed it, let me know, and I shall see you again soon, guys. Bye.